Okay. We'll give Kristen another minute here.
What's that one?
Like I just saw.
Yeah, a little late. We're waiting on the crane guy, but it's hard when it's free. It's hard to
That's worse. Good. How about yourself?
The regular. You got budget items for next one.
John,
Right. Yeah. This is more business kinds of items versus work session.
So we'll cover that when we get to the end. Can I give this to you? Did you get that?
I responded to him. I told him we were still discussing him.
Okay. Cool. Do you want me to forward that to you?
Oh, that'd be great.
Okay.
You don't mind.
Yep. I will do that.
Chris, have you heard from that couple?
Hard to
Vista. She tried.
He's basically talking about
I'll chat with you.
satisfying, no.
the roadway church owns the bottom of Elm Street, Key Street, and walking it off.
Yeah, what we decided last night.
Right.
I haven't.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. And oh, it's pretty upfront. Okay, here we go. So,
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I always want to start with just kind of a review of last week, see if we left anything undone, if there's any public comment that we need to address. Anything come up last Tuesday that was kind of a loose end, or?
Not for me.
Okay. Well, we're 10 minutes ahead of schedule already.
That's good. We're good.
Ma'am?
I received an email, a person, I'm just going to read it real quick, a part of it. It says, I also request a concern. A previous issue with the police department, we purchased cars for each officer a few years back. The community was told that the cars would be paid for with savings on fuel. Could one of you please pass along to me the actual figures on the cost of these extra cars and the savings on the fuel? I don't know if that's something that we could provide, but
We actually did all that computation, didn't we?
2.3 million was the cost, and I don't know what the savings were. The first year was, there was a savings. I don't remember what it. So I don't know after that. It was never said that the cost of the fuel would offset the price of the cars.
Well, I guess we can discuss as a group whether we want to, take a look at that car per officer
My
program.
further understanding, talking to other agencies, is that every other agency that's gone that direction has seen a net savings. And once you do that.
The cars aren't being run 24/7, and each individual is responsible for their car. It just the cars last longer.
Yeah, that's the main savings. But do you want to propose that we talk about this in a work session at some point, and some information?
That, or if I could just get, I don't know if we really need to do that. If I'd just like to reply with the question that he asked. If I could get the, he's just asking for the savings,
Okay.
or the actual figures of the cost of these extra cars and the savings on the fuel, whatever. If I could just, I'd like to give him that information if I could, if we can get it. I mean, if we can't, then I don't mind sending back to him.
We just get a kind of a rough, without
Yeah.
actual hard numbers, and just kind of say about, this is about how it's worked out.
I don't think we need a.
Something we can do?
If I could just, without applying specific numbers, the difference between the Crown Victoria and these police interceptors, it's substantial. You're looking at about 25% fuel savings. I have personally witnessed at a prior agency, and there would be no reason for me to believe that it would not have been the same amount of savings. There's no way that the fuel savings alone are going to constitute the purchase of the cars. The police fleet still needs to be a safe and modern fleet, but without question, it is a topic that has been researched by the best of the industry, and unequivocally they've found that the most cost efficient is the take-home car policy that we currently have.
Gotcha. Okay.
But more because the cars last longer than the
Absolutely.
6-cylinder versus the
Yes.
8-cylinder. Is that enough for you to kind of respond to him now? or-
Yeah, I if I could still
Once you
get some
forward to
number.
the council,
Okay.
then we'll
Yeah.
I think we were looking at 2.1 million, 60 vehicles, most of them Taurus 4-cylinders, or 6-cylinders. The Explorers were 6-cylinders as opposed to the 8. Not sure we didn't see 40 to 50,000 in maintenance and fuel savings in the first year, and I don't know if that's continued. Then you've got enhanced response times, you've got recall times are much better. Car longevity, regular car would last about 18 months in a 24-hour ongoing fleet. And there's still, most of those cars are the ones we bought when we started the program in 13.
Okay.
Not what that guy asked, but I know that a lot of oil companies have gone to that, and instead of oil field trucks being just beat up, they're nice anymore because people take better care of it when it's, this is yours.
Right.
Okay. Well, let's move on then. Anything else about last week? Okay. We're going to talk about planes. Oh, Steve?
I'm going to recuse myself from this discussion because I do have a client that's involved in this.
Seen an hour.
So, you want to guide us through this, Mr. City Manager?
Oh, I'd be happy to, you bet. Good evening, everybody. As council is aware, the window for submission of proposals with regards to the what's commonly referred to as the Plains buildings, but actually also includes the south parking lot as well as the livery building on the other side of the block in question. Those proposals were received on Friday, I think it was a week or so ago, and were reviewed by a selection committee, or I should say review committee. Those proposals were accordingly turned over to council as well. Following that review, and I think in that information packet, or at least a council packet of some nature, the two proposals that were submitted were submitted by the Ashby companies as well as Mr. Daigle and his partner, Mr. Hawley, in their development company. The primary consensus of the review committee was that the challenge council will have with regard to accepting either of the proposals was that indeed the proposals that were offered were indeed offered below appraised value. And so that will be the conversation primarily that council will need to have with regard to being able to move forward. And so with that in mind, if council should decide that moving forward is not an option, and I would certainly defer to Mr. Henley to kind of walk us through those elements of the agreement, or excuse me, of the RFP, and you know, what options may or may not be available to you. Certainly, the discussion that council would need to have is which proposal is of the greatest and most beneficial use for those properties in question. And so, with that, if council decides that moving forward is not an option, then the discussion would need to involve what the RFP would look like if council wants to try again and go out again, or what your desire would be otherwise with respect to those properties. And so if I could, Mr. Mayor, defer to Mr. Henley to kind of walk us through that debate a little bit. And we would certainly appreciate direction accordingly after that.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. We met, and it was Liz Becker, Carter, and Bob Hopkins all met. I think we had one other person to open the bids.
Mr. Pitlick,
Okay.
Mr. Elston, Mr. Beamer.
All right.
And Mr. Henley.
And I was there as
And
well.
of course, that was,
And so we opened them, we found that two proposals. The flag proposal had another packet of confidential information, which I'm sure that you can see if you want to, from Ms. Becker, who I think is the keeper of the confidential information, as did the Ashby Construction Company had additional confidential information. With respect to some of that confidential information, is design type of information, so maybe not particularly pertinent to today's discussion, but it would be available. In looking at the request for proposals that we had sent out along with the addendum, one of the items that we were looking for, of course, is the amount of money that we're going to receive, the purchase offer of the parties. And indeed, in one of the addenda, there was a specific requirement that the appraised value, which was published to the individuals that were looking to bid on this, be met or exceeded. In this case, neither of the proposals met that kind of threshold question. In that regard, the question becomes, well, what do we do? One of the requirements, one of the reasons that we had that requirement, there may be the principal reason, is that we don't want to be seen, can't be seen, and can't give public funds, value, property, wealth to private individuals. It's a constitutional prohibition. So now we put this out for bid. Both have come back in underneath the appraised value. The question would be, and we discussed this, going back out with another RFP, letting people know that since we've done that, maybe our appraisal was a little high because we have no offers that would meet or exceed that, and therefore we could justify by a council finding that a subsequent RFP might give you a little bit of flexibility to look at the amounts if they came in again under appraisal. So that's kind of where we stand with these. They were both obviously for market-based housing and some mixed-use retail as well. So it looked like good proposals, really good faith efforts on the part of those who made the bids, made the proposals. But in the analysis, they did not comply with the packet that we sent out. We think it would be inappropriate to just look at these two without putting it back out and letting other people know that we would consider something less than the appraised value.
Questions for John? Chris?
Is this the second RFP we put out on this?
Mr.
No.
Mayor, it actually is the first RFP, but if you'll recall, we had two amendments
Okay.
that were connected to it as the development process was underway, because you
That's what I'm thinking.
authorized a rather long window to prepare those responses. if
We
you
added
recall.
the parking lot after it was originally developed, and then we also allowed the parking lot to be attached only to the horse barn versus
Right.
the planes. Those are the two changes. Any other questions for John? So John, let me see if I understand. You're basically saying because we said it had to be appraised value, we may have had bidders who would have also bid under appraised value if we had allowed that in the RFP. Is that getting it?
That is correct, and I understand that there were some conversations from potential bidders, and they just said, we're not gonna go forward because we cannot make a pencil at the current appraised value. So we would anticipate if we open this back up, there would be likely at least 2 more, maybe more than that. We just don't know.
If we were to relent on that.
And say that we may have some flexibility there, but of course, we're still gonna be considering price.
Chris?
We've talked about accepting bids before and state law concerning that, but it's the first time I've heard that we might be in conflict with that if it's below the appraised. Is that what you're saying as far as?
That's the concern. If you don't get that, if you have a value on a piece of property, and then you sell it to Joe Blow for only 75% of that, then it seems as if you are violating the Constitution provision because you're bestowing a benefit upon someone that should actually not be bestowed pursuant to the Constitution. And here I believe that with respect to the flag property, it's almost $400,000. The flag proposal was almost $400,000 less than the appraised amount for those properties they wanted. And then in the Ashby proposal, they were actually undervalued the livery stable. And I think the bid for the parking lot was actually at or above the appraised.
With reference to that state law, would it stand us in better stead with that if we just were to just have an open auction and just say we'll sell it to the highest bidder?
You can do that, or you could just have a sealed bids would be another option.
Well,
to do
that would, yeah.
Yeah, an auction, sealed bids, you could do that. If you do that though, then you basically are looking at just the value, and here, we had a lot of the things we're
Sure.
hoping,
Right.
historic, mixed use, that the proposers did a good job in trying to incorporate those into the
Well, and I appreciate there were a lot of all those other factors in there, and I'm certainly not, by asking that question, meaning to discount those values.
Sure.
Bob?
Thank you. Might there be some other options in talking to bankers when they do a repo on a house or something? They sometimes will figure out a way to give a lower than normal rate on a loan, or are there other options we might do to kind of sweeten the pot?
Well, I think if we were to put it back out, like I say, I think that the pot's been kind of contaminated for this time, but if we were to put it back out, I was trying to think about how even with the developmental plant that we had, if we could actually, retain title to something and then lease it to some of the developers for another use, and then that would give us, we would still retain the property, and we wouldn't be giving away so much value. So, say that we wanted to use someone's parking lot, so we would not sell them the parking lot space, but use that space and develop our own parking lot, and then since they need this for their development, we can loan it to, or lease it to them for a certain amount, and retain a certain amount of parking spaces for the city itself. Something along those lines, but I think there are things that could be done when we get the proposals back in. We can look at them and maybe visit with some of the developers if they're close, and if it's something that the council would seem to want us to follow up on.
One follow-up, if I may. Do you think if we do something different and do elect to reject bids or the current RFPs, do you think it's reasonable, I guess, to get this still done without losing a whole construction season?
Mr. Mayor and Councilman Hopkins, I certainly would recommend that if indeed we do take another run at this, that reducing the window by which the proposal is prepared would make sense, particularly if council would like to have the possibility of looking at something at least toward the latter end of the construction season. I suppose that being able to take advantage of the full construction season is probably off the table at this point, but who knows? And I certainly think it would be helpful to understand what each proposer would suggest by way of time frame. But their project would need to get underway and hopefully get completed.
Chris?
Mr. Henley, what harm has been done if we put this back out and these gentlemen have put their idea out there? What have we done as far as other bids coming in? Their concept is going to be known and clear to everybody.
Their concept, to the extent that it was in the public record, would be known, but as to the confidential submissions, those would be kept under seal and in possession of the Specker. So, that was part of the RFP that we sent out. Those materials would have to be made public, simply public records, and so in some ways they may feel a little bit disadvantaged. On the other hand, they have feedback from you knowing that you like their proposals too. So maybe it's a plus and a minus. I don't know how those balance out.
Thank you.
Mike?
When the Milo's K-Lark building was sold, how close was that to the appraisal?
I think all of those buildings were over the appraisals that we had
They all sold for more than the appraisal.
at the time. That's correct.
So you could see a problem if we were to move forward. It could come back to bite us in terms of just following state law.
Well, and also then our express language and the addendum that had to be at or above appraisal.
I know we had a long discussion of whether we were going to require that. And I think we went with your opinion that we really had to get appraised value or above.
Right.
Well, if that's the case, then how would we be able to rewrite it to say we'll accept bids below appraised value?
Well, and thinking about that, a true value, a true market value is a willing buyer and a willing seller. None of the willing buyers and the willing seller here were able to match that appraised value. So none of the willing buyers were able to go that high, which is then maybe an indication of the council in making a decision later on and say, we've looked at this, we've looked at all of the different proposals, and on 2 occasions now. And so we think that our appraised value was high, therefore we deem this to be a fair market value because we've now been at it, letting people who are knowledgeable make what they consider to be a fair offer. And so that might be, it seems to me that's a reasonable way to make a rationalization, but we would probably want a finding by the council that they looked at the appraisal, they tried to get the money that would be required to make it meet or exceed the appraisal. But if the next batch comes in and they're still below, you can say, we've now given this two efforts, and so that appraisal just must have been high.
And it's hard for me to remember the entire sequence of events here, but was the appraisal by any chance too high because it wasn't understood at that time just how structurally flawed the horse barn was?
I haven't talked with the appraisal. Ms. Becker may have more information on that if you
Or is there
talk with her.
any way to understand why this appraisal is?
Your Honor, we did have the horse barn reappraised after the structural report was produced. And it actually did bring it down. It was originally at $340,000. After the structural assessment, it dropped to $300,000.
It's basically the land, since the building is not usable. Well, just playing around with ideas, is there any way we could take care of that property? Because it's gonna be demolished by whoever. We could take care of that piece and then, I don't know. I'm suggesting we should, I'm just asking a question.
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, if indeed this group were to decide that removing that building would be in the better interest of potentially garnering more favorable bids, the problem would be that your investment in that property would therefore go up. And the question then would become whether or not recouping those costs as well as your purchase costs would make sense. And that could complicate the discussion, but
Just asking.
yeah.
Chris?
Well, do we know a number? Did you just say 300,000 for the livery? And what's that parking lot valued at?
Your Honor, 275,000.
Isn't our proposal from the flag organization put them both over the appraised values of each of those locations? Those two pieces, but I guess it's the package that we're looking at that they're below. All right.
Mr. Hammond?
It was the package that we're looking at. That's the way that the proposals came in. That's, I think, probably how you'd have to evaluate them to consider all of the criteria that we had within the request for proposal.
Anybody have any bright ideas?
It seems like we have to put this back out.
I agree, because I mean, the unfortunate part is if somebody out there had read the addendum and they're like, oh, well, you know, I was gonna go 200 low on that one part, where now we're potentially considering accepting one that's 400 low. Like, well, I thought I couldn't accept one that was low, and I would have liked to have put in my offer for 200 less. And, I mean, that's, yeah, I agree with Chris.
I understand your concern, Bob, but I think we have to look long-term on this deal. You know, how this ends up is such an important thing. And if we lose a construction season because, yeah, so be it.
Ms. Becker, do you think it would be 60 days would be too short a period of time?
No, I think that would be realistic.
I'd just like to say again, state my opinion again, that it's important that we recoup as much of this money as we can, but that should not be the only factor that we consider. It really, we have a responsibility, in my opinion, to look at these proposals and say, is this what is the right thing for this piece of ground? Is that what in the best interest of the city? Because 20, 30 years from now, nobody's gonna know how much of that appraisal we got back, but they'll know what it looks like and how it works.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I think that you're absolutely right about that, because, you know, it would sound that the city is probably gonna be upside down on these prices and values from what has been invested into it. I think that when the city got into those properties, clearly they were hopeful and wanting to enhance that whole area there. And it might be such a thing that at some point the city's just going to say, well, we're going to stay in this and use it for some higher value than, you know, and by that I mean longer term value to the city than some of these things. I'm probably not expressing that real well, but at some point, you know, is there an obligation that we have to sell these things right now that I'm not aware of? You know, they're
Just the taxpayers getting money back?
well,
for
yeah,
investment?
but, you know, obviously I think that when they were purchased with a higher value expectation, that it would be a good thing for the city to have something of high value in there. I don't think we should just, you know, discard that opportunity or something now.
Didn't catch what you're saying.
That's okay. I just wanted to respond real quickly. Mr.
And
Mayor.
I'm not expressing what my thoughts real clearly there probably, but I hope you guys can kind of guess what I'm thinking.
I'll give it a shot, Councilman, Mr. Mayor. The difficulty that we face also is the longer that we wait, the shelf life of those particular appraisals tend to wear out and expire. And so my recommendation would be that if indeed we are going to move forward with another RFP, we try to take advantage of the current appraisal that we have so that we don't delay the process any further.
I
and
completely agree.
Bring into question the value of those properties again and then create a whole nother dilemma for ourselves moving forward.
If I could interject, when we first started saying, what do you think we should do with this? We got all kinds of ideas from people, most of which would have cost millions and millions of dollars for the city to complete with no source of funding. So they were nice ideas, but not realistic. So somebody was waiting, Chris.
I don't want to hang on to them because I am absolutely certain that we won't do anything as neat as either of these organizations have presented to us. both of them are great concepts. And I would like to see that go on. It looks like, probably by the way we crafted it, and a closer look at state law on, you know, property and giving it away, because we have sold things under all the time. But that makes perfect sense that we don't. I think it's horrible that we're in a position where we put this back out, with the effort that's been put in by both organizations. But that's gonna, you're comfortable that's gonna give us a fair market value that,
I would think that would be the case. Of course, it'd be up to you as a group to discuss that and decide, yeah, really that this is a fair market value when the time comes.
Ray?
Charlie, is it my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, we can make exceptions, correct? Yeah, for the contractors? I mean, if we
What do you
wanted to,
mean,
we
Rex?
can make exceptions to that so it doesn't disqualify them. We can do that. Am I correct in saying that?
I'm not sure I understand you, Ray. Exceptions to the requirement to give
Yeah,
appraised value?
yes.
Yeah, and I tell you,
That's John's.
we couldn't, if we believed that it was, that we were giving them too good of a deal, that it really wasn't a fair market value. I mean, that is a constitutional requirement. We just cannot do that. So, I mean, but at this point, having seen these proposals and only 2 proposals coming in with that requirement, and we knowing that there are other people out there who were interested but simply didn't submit because of the constitutional requirement we put in there that it be appraised.
So it'd be pretty difficult for us, is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that you have to do your work and you have to have a good, sound, rational basis for it. And I'm thinking that between this offering and the response that we received, only 2, and those were, either one met the appraised or exceeded the appraised value, you at least have a good, rational basis for it. Now, the next time it goes out, maybe somebody will come in above the appraised value. We just don't know.
Chris and then Ken.
is 30 days long enough?
I was wondering the same thing, the people that started working on it and then aborted it because they couldn't finance it. That's pretty
I
tight.
would defer to Ms. Becker.
Tell me what you think.
There were other groups that were working on this actively. I don't know how far they are. Maybe 45.
Here's what I'm thinking. We put it out, we put the time limit on Ashby and Flag. And has there been fine-tuned proposals been going on, maybe in hopes that these wouldn't come through? And so everybody else that's willing to apply has an extra opportunity or had an extra opportunity to put in a little more detail in their proposal. I guess I'm not stuck to it one way or another, but I can't get past that. I think we're doing them a disservice, but I don't think that we have a choice.
Chris, I'm sorry, Ken was waiting.
I would agree that we need to put it back out. I think the 60 days is more understandable to allow those who wanted to appraise but chose not to, or bid on or whatever. If others may come in because they know this now, I think we need to give everybody an opportunity. I think 60 days is right. But although, with all regard, I think I agree with Councilman Huber on when we get this back, we look at it, if it's under praise, even depending on how far it's under praise, I think look into the future and holding on to it. Where it's at, with us developing downtown, developing Old Yellowstone, all that, I think down the road we may have something bigger, better possibly coming. I know it's a gamble, but some gambles really pay off, and I think we need to, depending on how under budget I think we need to consider it.
David Street Station is the heart of that area, and this is right next to it. I think letting it sit there and waiting for something is not realistic for what we've discussed last night and for the things that we want to happen downtown. The only other thing I say is, I agree, I definitely think unfortunately it's kind of the thing of, you showed your cards. But some of us are rule followers. I'm a black and white rule follower, I'm an accountant. If I had looked at that and I had seen an addendum that said, you cannot bid on this if it wasn't over appraisal, I would have stopped there, had I initially been intending to come under. So, we can't really punish people for following the rules.
Mr. Mayor, just to be clear, the language with regard to the appraised value was not in the addendums. It was actually in the corpus of the
Oh, okay.
of the bid documents. And so that's been a stated objective of this council from the beginning.
Almost certainly scared some people off. Well, I don't know. I guess we're all seeing the same thing. We've got to do this. That's the advice of attorney.
Do we want to establish a timeline for the next one?
I think 60 days is still, people are gonna have to get with it pretty quick to get a proposal together in 60 days. Bob?
I guess I propose if we're gonna put it out again, that we give it maybe 75 days or something. That still puts us reasonably within a construction season to get some of the concrete work done or whatever that might require done. People have had a heads up. We've had several people that read the document and said it had to meet such and such criteria. Well, I feel bad that we've got two really nice looking proposals, great proposals. We have other people that just turn tail. And so I think we'd be, from a business ethics standpoint, I think we'd be better off to put it out again.
I would like to go no longer than 60 days because if I had the means and the funds, I could combine both of their proposals. They've already done all the work and have it done in a week.
The proposal to put it out for 60 days and see what we get, is that where we're sitting? And I mean, we can keep discussing this, but the reality is we can't move forward with the advice we're getting from our attorney.
Can that, will that require an official vote, or will that be 60 days from today?
That's a good question. Mr. Henley.
Yeah, I think that, the question was whether we had, I think we can just say that all were disqualified based upon the plain language. We didn't have any bids that came in. So I think given that fact, really we had zero bids that were compliant. So I don't know that, we could probably get this turned out right away and put it back out.
It wouldn't require us to pass anything on the floor again.
Given the fact that really none of them were confirmed bids, I think you're probably okay with that, but we can certainly include a resolution and ratify the action at the next regular council meeting before us.
So should we start it today or next Tuesday?
Next Tuesday.
I'd say next Tuesday.
To go formal with it, to make a resolution stand next week.
So we have no bids that met the specs, and we will reissue it.
Obviously, anybody watching this closely knows that the clock really starts for them today, regardless of when we pass a resolution, and they could begin working on it tomorrow.
I would suggest we go no longer than 60.
60 days from next Tuesday.
Yes.
I would suggest that you draft a resolution right now.
Okay.
We can take it up next week and put it on make sure it's on the agenda for next week.
Any objections to going forward with that?
Because in theory, there are people there's no behind the scenes work. It'll ultimately just be changing that wording.
Yes.
Okay.
I think in general that would be true.
Any other concerns? Carter?
Mr. Mayor, just to be clear, it sounds like council is directing staff to prepare the bid request, if you will, the proposal request, to include language that would allow a little more flexibility with regard to appraised value and those kinds of things.
I agree.
Right?
To the extent legal. I mean, if
Yep.
we've,
Very good.
Okay, I guess we'll do a thumbs up on that then and move on.
Thank you.
Okay. There's no other comments on plans, we'll move on to the municipal court revision.
See her.
Oh.
She
Okay.
probably thinks 540.
Oh, well,
Oh,
good
whoops.
point. Well, we can move right ahead to the repayment options.
We have rejected.
Is prepared to talk
Yeah.
about that,
Oh,
Carl?
yeah.
Be conditions.
Where's Steve?
there's,
That's perfect timing.
Oh, okay. All right.
We talked about you, boy.
I'll bet you didn't hear it.
Most of the time.
we were shacking. Both.
I think we're ready to start.
Excellent.
Repost.
You're on.
So basically, we just wanted to provide an update. We met with the committee and are focusing on a few different things, but tonight we kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the financial aspect of the court. We've started implementing recovery of court costs, restitution, records checks, those sort of mandatory costs. They have to come back into the court. They can't be waived through community service, that sort of thing. We took over parking tickets from customer service, and we've been working with the PD to get everything to automatically download, get that to come up, so that that's kind of not a hiccup anymore. We had a little bit of trouble last week with them downloading, but I think we got all the bugs worked out at this point. We've implemented, since I came on, a policy as far as the victim compensation fund. That is now being sent out monthly to the state. That goes to the state for crime victim compensation relief. We're trying to gear our focuses right now on cleaning up the transition from Omni, which is our old operating system, to Justware, which is our new system. I'm going through and doing case audits. Deidre's handling the financial aspect of that, closing cases, cleaning up those financials. The restitution account, we're working on clearing that up. There's about $3,000 to $4,000 in the account we'll need to examine, as it was misappropriated due to clerical errors, or it could be in the bond fund somewhere else. We do have a significant balance in Omni and GEMS to date that we're working on reconciliation of. That's $295,656.69. Our goal is to get all that cleaned up. That could be restitution, that could be bond, that could be misappropriations, clerical errors. So we're working on getting that fixed. July 1st is the goal on that. We're also evaluating, and I've spoken with Carter as far as evaluating the potential for collection. We have cases that are like 2,000 days old. Chances of collection of those are probably pretty slim. So we're looking at whether the cases, the collection ability, and then we're getting data to then, we're gonna probably have to write some of that off. And I'm gonna provide that to Carter at a later date once we kind of get everything gathered up. That'll probably be around July 1st, hopefully, to get all that cleaned up. We're working hard now with NRBC, which is suspension of driver's license for moving violations, depending on whether they qualify or not. You can only do that up to 6 months. So we're gonna go back, and I think I'm about done with that. I've done those audits myself. So we're there on that. The last one should be sent out this week to suspend driver's licenses. We're doing notices of warrants. If you're either eligible or you've had a warrant issued, I found that there's some people that I think just genuinely forgot about their ticket. So if we send out another notice, it'll either bring us to the next step of doing a failure to comply in another warrant, or we've also been working with the PD as far as going out and setting like a top 10 list and work on going out and picking those individuals up. So, anything I missed? Pretty much it.
Chris?
Judge, first of all, I want to compliment you on the work you've been doing. heard a lot of good things.
Thank you.
I haven't been in your courtroom fortunately, so, but I have heard from people that are. That's a pretty big chunk of unaccounted for money, so is that something that we can help with? Hiring an accounting service to help track? Or your staff is not big, it never has been big?
I met with Pete, and we're gonna kind of review that. This might have been money that was previously accounted for by a previous manager that we're not quite sure, so, I'll get back to him probably within the next 30 days, to find out, but it's been a lot of research. I think July 1 is a good date though for us. I don't think it's unrealistic for us to do that on our own. So when Carla was the manager, there was the transition from Omni to Justware. And so there was a lot of movement that just some errors could happen. We're definitely not saying that any money was, you know, taken or anything like that. It's just, we need to make sure that we have that account zeroed out, everything's reconciled. And so that's kind of what, but I don't think at this stage, if we see anything, we're making sure that we're very precise on our accounting trail, making sure we keep a paper record of everything. If there's anything strange, we're working very well with finance. Pete's been over a number of times. We've talked to him about kind of how to approach that. So I think we're comfortable at this stage. We do appreciate that. And so at any point that we feel like it's something that has gotten too big for us, we'll definitely reach out.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike, were you waiting to say something?
Well, you clarified what I was gonna ask about, because you used the term misappropriation. And I think what you were referring to is just whether it's in this account or that account.
Well, in our drop downs as far as where it needs to go, which accounts, we found a lot of still open active cases that just need to be closed out, just different clerical aspects.
Carter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Judge, I too want to thank you for the work that you're focusing on, particularly in these areas. It's very much appreciated. In your memo, you mentioned a number of thresholds that you evaluate when it comes to writing off bad debt and effectively dropping some of these issues into a bad debt expense category. Would you or the court be opposed to a policy statement that kind of memorializes those thresholds so that indeed council and the new councils that come after this group and so on have that understanding when they reflect upon financial policies and so forth?
Absolutely. I do think because I'm running into new things, the deeper I dig, that I'm like, well, we need to add this. So I think, yeah, after maybe we get this all cleaned up, I think that would absolutely be appropriate, but I'm still adding criteria at this stage, so probably not today, but definitely by July 1st. I think that'd be a good idea. Perfect. Yes.
Perfect.
Sean?
When you talk about collections, are you speaking about like old traffic tickets and things like that that are unpaid, or?
Yeah, so for example, just, you know, a lot of times with the movement of staff, with the movement of like switching parking tickets, it went from us to finance and now it's back to us. So the tickets I was clearing out just before I came over here were tickets like subpoenas were sent out, just nobody ever showed up. They're from 2013. So I've sent a list of those over to the city attorney's office to then say, what are you going to do with these? Do we want to dismiss and get them off? Since they never even appeared, charges have just been filed. As far as old accounts that there's judgments in place, then that kind of works into my purview. So then we evaluate based on these criteria to determine if we're going to proceed with trying to do a failure to comply, that sort of thing, to proceed with them as far as our end of things.
Your area, Kristen, are we looking pretty good with all of this in your view?
Sounds like they're doing everything right as far as the audit trail's the biggest thing. I mean, especially when you're talking about $300,000 being off. If they're just really careful and document everything, that's perfect. That's exactly what someone's going to want to come in and see.
Okay. Mike?
And Mr. Mayor, having visited with Judge Lund and having some experience in this line myself, the process that she has described about going through with reference to old cases, in essence doing a docket call and clearing those off of the out of the docket, that's pretty much standard practice with any court. And so it's I think it's a real good positive thing that they're working on that. you know, taking care of that backlog that probably should have been dealt with over the years, and it sounds to me like they're going at it in a business-like way too, so.
So if someone fails to appear, there might be a reminder that they need to do something about that.
Yes, so basically right now what I'm looking at is, so everything, for example, no insurance, no driver's license, from pretty much 90 days to about a year, we're sending out those, and then I'm evaluating from a year older to determine if it's worth it or not. We're using, you know, just the internet, doing internet searches on these people. Somebody that say came through town, had a no insurance ticket, is never gonna probably have contact with this state again, or even Casper. We probably shouldn't waste our time.
So a 16-year-old kid who just hit a parked car at 5 miles per hour and treated the ticket like a candy wrapper would then get some kind of reminder so that they wouldn't spend the night in jail.
Yes, and I don't issue warrants
Just
for
for
minors.
just as an
Yeah.
example.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Log 'em up.
It is my policy to not issue warrants for minors. I don't do that. That makes me very uncomfortable. So we typically issue a summons, mail that out, then we go the route of personal service, and then if we still can't get their attention, then we try to get the parents' attention. So I'm pretty careful with minors.
Sounds like people are pretty happy with what you're doing, Chris.
I think it's a fantastic example of leadership. Identified some shortcomings and brought them to us, and we're working on them. Thank you.
It sort of backs up what Dallas was saying all along, is that moving in this direction with the court would have a lot of advantages, so. Yeah. Any other questions for Judge Lund? Very good. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We just had from another municipality, someone come to jail. It's a 17-year-old traffic warrant, $900 cash only bond.
From 17 years.
17 years. Like, oh my God.
I didn't sign that warrant.
No, it was, it was a municipality
write the
in
ticket
this
there.
area.
Right.
And I was like,
You
2002,
get
is that
subpoenaed.
right? Traffic ticket. for
Okay, well, let's
17
move on
years
to the
ago.
repayment options for the tax overpayment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We provided you a memo that kind of outlined the approach that we would like to take with regard to paying off the overpayment from the state. And as you found in the memo, you learned, like I did, that portions of those funds could be attributed to an overpayment on the 1% side of our ledger, if you will, and operating revenue on the general fund side of the ledger as well. We're recommending a bifurcated approach with regard to getting those funds back into the state's hands. We're suggesting that with regard to the 1% portion of the overpayment, that indeed we just go ahead and pay it in a lump sum, which is in total of about $773,000, and thereby allowing for appropriate planning purposes from a project standpoint, without the concern and worry that there may be some encumbrances associated with this repayment back to the state. And given the nature of the use of sales, I should say 1% tax dollars in this organization, and it being primarily a project basis, we think that that would be helpful. On the other hand, with regard to the operational impacts that the general fund side of the implication of this repayment constitutes, we do suggest taking advantage of the terms that the state offered us, which was namely 5 years of a repayment schedule on a quarterly basis with no interest affixed, which amounts to about $85,000 or so a quarter that we would pay over time. And that allows a fairly minimal impact to the revenue stream that we would have to plan for, while taking advantage of very favorable repayment options that the state has proffered. And so I didn't want to move forward with an assumption that you would be okay with that approach. And so we're asking for that approval, if you will, and we will respond accordingly with that direction or other direction that you might have.
Comments on Carter's proposal? Bob?
Yeah, I agree with it. I'm still mad at the state, but I agree with what you're doing. I think this is probably a good way to do it.
Do we, I know like before when we met, I can't remember what it's called, legislative dinner, we had discussed with the legislators about discussing like how the state reconciles that, or is it literally just willy-nilly toss it in a drawer? Do we know, was there any discussion at all as far as how they handle those monies?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, I appreciate that question, and I'm sad to report that, well, maybe sad is an overstatement, but disappointed to report that we really didn't make any progress in that track of discussion, if you will, throughout the legislative session. I didn't hear of any, budget allocations or anything of that sort that would have improved the software and those types of tracking programs. I was hopeful for legislation that would have allowed more access for cities and towns when they have these issues to information. That type of discussion didn't gain a lot of traction either. And so disappointingly, I have to report that nothing like that seemed to have had any success, unfortunately.
And that all came about after WHAM had approved its resolutions, and so.
Correct.
But we did have a discussion as a board, just as an aside, that we need to go a little further and actually begin drafting some language, that there's something that they can see as a proposed legislative solution rather than we'd like this fixed, and actually work on crafting the language with the sponsor and moving forward. There are some states where associations can actually sponsor their own legislation. We're not allowed to do that here, but to move a little, otherwise we're relying on someone else to do all of that work, and we're just so busy that it doesn't happen. So, any other comments on Carter's solution? Personally, I think this is money that never should have come into the 1 cent in the first place, so it makes perfect sense to send it back to them because we never should have gotten it. And that will put us in a position where it's much easier to work off the rest. Any other comments, questions? Are we okay with this? Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. Malt beverage server research. Okay. Saw that in that.
Or the resolution.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the overconsumption resolution.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have been working on a draft, as you know. Some of you have weighed in on language and that kind of thing. We've tried to incorporate all of the feedback into the draft that you should have in front of you this evening. We just really need direction as to how far you want to see this go, what amendments to language you'd like to see this evening, so that we can prepare it for the floor and get your approval or not.
And we don't have to do a resolution. It's optional. I think I was the one who originally suggested it. My thinking being that if we're going to back off from the chief's proposal, that we make a statement that if we continue to see a worsening of this problem, this option is still available to us. Kristen?
On item number 1, we need to change this. It's not just the TIPS program, it's all the programs that are approved by the state statute, or Title 12.
Title 12.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's just back up. First off, do people want to do a resolution of this type?
Well, Mr. Mayor, when I weighed in on this, we were having a discussion about if we were going to do away with the punishment for over-serving and all that kind of thing, and then there was kind of a wide-ranging discussion going on about what direction we were going to go with that. That is, the ordinance has since been amended. The proposed ordinance has been amended to take out the punishment and to put in the requiring training and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if you know, now that we've got that in that, ordinance, if that, does away with the need for doing a resolution like this, I don't know how much more a resolution, actually adds to that situation or not, other than, just a statement that we're really concerned about it. I like the third point that, you or someone, added on there, that, the council would be monitoring this real closely. I like the idea of underlining and emphasizing that to all liquor dealers.
Yeah, I think the judge is right that we are making a resolution on something that we're actually placing an ordinance. What I remember when we were doing this is, if we don't see improvement, we will re-include the criminalization of overservice, not training, because we've got, the training's already in the law.
That was my suggestion at the time, was let's consider
That was my thought too.
Consider a resolution that basically says this needs to work.
Yeah, because
If it
we're already
doesn't,
saying by
we'll do
law you
something
gotta
else.
take it.
So, Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm not sure the resolution would do it for us, but one thing that we could do that's fairly straightforward, we know who our licensees are. Just send them a letter that the liquor ordinances have changed and you're gonna have that 90-day training. The resolutions get published, and but people, the liquor dealers, some of them may not see it. Now, I know most of them are really pretty well tuned in on the liquor laws, but for the cost of a letter to each one of our licensees, I think we probably gained as much by doing that. Now, they can't say, didn't know about it.
Just playing the devil's advocate, they do all the training, but they continue to overserve. Because overtraining doesn't eliminate overserving. You have to actually use the training.
That's right.
Sean?
I've never been a huge fan of resolutions, because really, what's the point? And especially one that's almost threatening in nature. Do this or else. They already know that this council's taking this seriously, when we already looked at criminalizing overservice. So I don't know that it's even necessary.
I think it also helps now that we have a council member that'll be attending the alcohol task, or the alcohol dealers meetings, so that you'll have that open line of communication between them. If we have an issue that comes up, we can certainly use that chain or that person sitting there to address the issue. And if it can't be addressed, then it comes back here and we address it as a council.
Ken?
So I vote against it. I don't think we need the resolution.
Because I had talked about that, just, you know, thinking if we ended up with nothing in the ordinance, that the resolution would be a fallback. And as far as sending out a notification, I'm sure that the chief would be in a good position to send something like that out.
Okay. It's not that big a deal to me whether we do a resolution or not. I just wanted to give a message that we're backing off on this for now, but things have to get better. And as you pointed out, we don't know how many of these DUIs were house parties versus out people leaving a bar. We don't have that kind of data.
Okay.
So, I guess we should give a thumbs up or thumbs down. Thumbs up for going forward with the resolution. I think
As written?
As well, or a resolution at all.
We're just withdrawing.
Because we got people arguing against doing any kind of resolution.
Oh, no, I know that. I would like a resolution that says we will recriminalize, or we will put the criminal aspects back in.
I mean, ultimately, we'd have to vote on it because it'd be an amendment to an ordinance, so I don't know that we could put in a resolution just saying definitively that that's what we would be doing.
Okay. Thumbs up for the resolution going forward. Okay. Got
I think it's
two
pretty
thumbs
bad.
up. Fails.
Pretty well now.
Okay. Thank you for doing your work on that. I guess it wasn't necessary. Okay. You gave us something to look at. Malt beverage server research.
Pursuant to council's request, Mr. Henley's office looked into other jurisdictions, municipalities, and so forth with regard to the question of the volunteer servers concept. And you've got a memo with regard to that outcome of that research, if you will. We would take any questions that you would have, unless Mr. Henley wants to add anything at this point.
Well, Mayor and Council, I think that's fine. I don't know if you received any communication from Mr. Cortez, but the Defense Center already requires this in their service.
Was this about the volunteer folks? Is that what we're talking
Correct.
about?
It looks like it's almost standard practice to do this in every location. Although they do like a training light in one of them, right, Chris?
Alcohol problem is universal, and it doesn't know whether you're being salaried or not. So if we're gonna require it for people that are paid, I'd say we require it for everybody that serves.
That's where we all started to land, so. Do you need any other further action on this? We have to amend the ordinance now, don't we? Yes, okay,
Someone will take the initiative.
so, Steve?
So as far as the amendment, I think we talked about adding volunteers in there. Would that take care of it?
Basically, on the second page of the memo, what we decided, and I forget who mentioned it, maybe Councilman Huber, but to just add this requirement within the malt beverage permit itself. So we have it in a different section, and since it's only for 24 hours, it really is a special exception relative to the people that hold liquor licenses and permits.
Any other comments on whether we should add that language to the ordinance as an amendment? Okay with doing this? Thumbs up?
What, didn't that ordinance already just say server? I don't think it said, and I think there was reference that it said within 90 days of becoming employed, it might imply, but I thought that more broadly it just said server.
That's it. Excuse me.
Go ahead.
That was the problem. Here, you're not never gonna, or seldom would have 90 days. That, you're gonna go get all beverage for 2 weeks from
Oh,
today.
okay.
Thumbs up on that amendment? So we get to talk about the alcohol ordinance one more time? Or 3 more times, actually.
2.
2 more times.
We're up to third reading next.
This
next
is
time.
Oh,
third
that's
reading?
right, that's right, that's right. We aren't.
You got one more.
Yeah.
Unless you want another
Yep,
reading.
table
We're
that.
open.
No, no, I'm fine.
We can do 4, 5, or 6, whatever.
All right.
Let's talk about dogs some more.
Yeah.
Let's bring the guys out.
Okay, so let's go through next week's agenda first, and then the work session for 4 weeks from today, because we have our work session already planned for 2 weeks from today. Anything of note that we need to talk about here for the 19th?
For the 5th or 19th?
Oh, I'm sorry, for the 5th.
Okay, I'm sorry. Third reading of the liquor license, of course, Mr. Mayor. Second reading of the small wireless facility cost study. We talked about the sanitary sewer interceptor project. That is a big spend, and we are making application by virtue of your approval, hopefully on this date as well. And you know, those are the probably the more visible items, if you will.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor? Chris? Just so when you guys hear me abstain from the establishment, or no, I thought we already had the establishment of public hearing for that new bar and grill license, 71 Southeast. Didn't we vote on that to set the public hearing? So this will be the public hearing?
Yes.
Yep.
I would agree with your.
I'm just looking at the wording on it. Okay, so it's going to be March 5th.
Would be much good.
I regulate those off-track betting locations. so that's why I'll be abstaining from it.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we can move on to planning our work session on the 12th, okay. Oh, no, not the 12th. The 12th is set, now we're working on the 26th. I'll get this straight.
Mr. Mayor,
Give me a chance to get this straight here, so.
before we get too far from the 12th, I think we agreed last night that we would try to bring back some council goals discussion,
Oh, that's right.
if that's okay still?
Yes,
Okay.
that's on the 12th.
We'll do our dead level best to be ready for that.
Okay, so moving on to the 26th. We have a list of proposed work session agenda items. And so, well, let's do this first. I'm still trying to get this drilled down. Does anybody have any other items they would like to add to this proposed work session agenda items list? Sean?
See, under staff suggested items, there's the Casper Event Center audit, which we've already had our finance committee meeting over, so we should probably put that one on there.
Okay. We're ready to put that on. Is everybody okay with putting that on the 26th?
How about that budget amendment that was proposed for the 12th? Is that on there? Yeah, the one down there, the staff suggested.
Oh, I've got an old
What was
copy of
that?
this, okay.
What was that budget amendment?
Mr. Mayor, Council, the 12th would probably be not the best date. Pursuant to what the outcome of the 12th would be, we may be able to use that amendment opportunity to adjust the budget pursuant to your direction on the 12th. And of course, as you know, that there could be a variety of directives that you would give that evening. So the 26th is probably better. And if you don't mind, depending on the breadth of those directives, we may need actually another week or two. So if I could have that flexibility, the 26th would certainly be
How much
probably
time?
more advisable.
How much time would you need on the 26th?
Oh, I'd say 10, 15 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so what else would we put on the 26th? We'll do the audit and the budget amendments. How much, do we, 10 minutes for the audit, you think?
I don't know, probably a little bit.
It might be enough for the, I mean, the audit might go a little bit longer,
Yeah.
so
20 minutes?
there's probably enough on there for the 26th.
Alright, so we got 30 minutes of stuff on the 26th. What else? Or I guess I'm still asking for comments on things to add to the list.
Well, Mr. Mayor, having turned my city-issued cellular phone in, and then having gone to the WAM meeting in Cheyenne, and them pointing out that we should all be using those instead of personal telephones, I think at some point we might want to talk about that a little bit. I don't know if
I did ask Michael Seshwick for options for ways that we might be assigned a landline that would then send messages to our personal phones, so that personal phone numbers wouldn't necessarily be part of the city's website, but some of you have had no difficulties with that either.
I've had mine on the website ever since, and I get phone calls, but I've never had a problem.
Well, there are some issues that I certainly hadn't thought about there with reference to records retention and things like that. And they just, the guys that put on that part of the meeting there, they just flat out said, you want to have a city-issued computer and you want to have a city-issued telephone, because otherwise there can be questions about destruction of evidence, or destruction of records and things like that. And they kind of just said it as a blanket statement. You don't want these things on some other form. And they had what sounded to me like some pretty good legitimate reasons for that. And so that's because I was more than glad not to have another phone sitting around, carrying it around. And then after they presented that in that one session that I sat in on down there, they changed my mind on that, and I think you might.
Yeah, I'm not tech savvy, but I was wondering if we had a landline, a city landline that ported a phone message over to our cell phone, if it would be recorded on the city servers, like any other voicemail that's on the city. So only the calls that came into that line would then be in the city's database, and we don't have to have a separate phone. I don't know if that's possible to do or
They
not.
were also concerned about outgoing calls. Outgoing calls, and retaining those. It was one of those things that kind of made my head hurt.
What about the people that stop at my house?
Yeah. Or you see
That
on
there's
the
never
city-
a record made. The issue that they were
Yeah.
saying is destruction of records. Because I said, well, how about when I sit there and I delete all these messages? And they said, no, you shouldn't be deleting those. They also said you should not be deleting emails, but you should be archiving them.
I think we do, the city
So
server
I
archives.
think maybe what
Yeah,
we-
those are all
yeah,
saved.
Yeah, emails, but, and so I think we do, but the phone calls and the records of phone calls.
When I'd say it's highly unlikely that anyone's keeping a cell
Well,
phone for 5 years.
Let's not try to solve it tonight. Let's just
Yeah.
put it on our list to
Yeah.
get to it. I mean, we could put that on the agenda for the 26th, if that's what you're saying, Mike.
Well, I would suggest that, but what I would also kind of suggest, if Mr. Henley wouldn't mind thinking about that in his spare time, and maybe the tax people thinking about it too. And I'd be happy to talk to you about who it was that has put that part on down there. And everything. I was surprised that, was pretty convinced by what they had to say there.
People want to talk, is that something you could get with Michael on, John? And
Be happy to.
I think that's too early, 4 weeks from today, to give us some information on options that would.
No, that'd be fine.
All right, so let's put that on the agenda, maybe give us 20 minutes, 30 minutes on that.
Oh, I hope not.
Well, I mean, you're right, it does give you a headache. I really don't want to carry another cell phone either. Okay. Any other things that people want to see on this list? I'm gonna bring one up that we don't have to decide on this evening, but I would like to bring up again that we are operating without a code of ethics. Since we eliminated the code of ethics due to the squishy language, what was that, about 6 months ago? And I understand the reasoning for doing that, but I think everybody like this should have a code of ethics. And so, at some point, I would suggest that we start working on that. And Mr. Henley actually gave us a proposal at that time that we did not act on at the time. And so we are operating without a code. So I don't think that's something we want to put on the 26th. Just a heads up that at some point.
You want it on this list?
Yes, please. Well, I guess I can't decide that on my own. People okay with that? At some point when we have a chance? We need to resolve the disability council matter. Ms. Rogers has been very patient with us, and we said we would not form a disability council without a discussion in a work session first. Wonder if we could dispense with that on the 26th. I don't think that'll be.
We have it on the 12th.
Yeah. Oh, it's already on the 12th.
It's on the 12th,
Yeah,
yeah.
excuse me, okay.
And
Thank
we're
you.
good for that one.
Okay. All right. So that's taken care of, that's taken care of. Anything else that we should put on the 26th? I'll mention this, I don't know, you get these calls, there's a gentleman whose daughter has done some work on the, and I hope I'm saying this right, a loophole that he described as a loophole, maybe I've got this wrong, that basically allows you to keep driving without plates or registration for 45 days after they expire. Is that true?
I don't think so.
Never heard of it.
Has that they given you documentation or like explanation of the
If
loophole?
it's true, that was.
Yeah, I just remembered.
Well, this,
Just
this,
for you.
I don't think she got a ticket.
let me call him back. I've obviously got a sketchy understanding of this, but I'll call him back. But he was saying my daughter worked really hard on this, and she wanted to give a presentation to council on this problem that nobody else is paying attention to.
Did he say if that was on a private party transaction
Well,
or from a dealer?
I don't know.
There's different standards of, yeah.
Yeah, and there is something, I think, with reference to dealers, that if the dealer doesn't deliver the title to you within a certain length of time of the transaction, that then you can get an extension.
I mean, if we start down that road and invite people in to give presentations on things of interest to them, we could, you know, who knows where that could land. But it'd be cool to have a simplest little kid give her 5 minutes.
Yeah, sometimes those presentations are best had before Judge Lund instead of us.
But why don't,
Okay.
I like your idea of talk to the guy.
I'll call
and
him one
see
more
what
time,
he
because
says.
the conversation took place a little while ago, so, okay. And the other thing that we probably should be talking about in executive session is make sure that the new council members are on board with how we've done our city manager and our attorney evaluations and our municipal judge evaluations, so because we want to be consistent about that. So I wonder if that's something we want to discuss in exec, or could we discuss the process in a work session? Any thoughts on that?
Mr. Mayor, I think discussing the process is very appropriate for regular meeting.
Get the timing of it and who would do it, and is that, are we full up on the 26th?
I think so.
Capital
26th
budget review.
Pretty busy.
All right, so we'll defer that for later and defer the ethics code for later.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Everybody good with
That's
the
fine.
26th?
Well, maybe we should stop.
Okay, then let's go around and then we can get out of here. So, I think that's all we've got. Well, legislative review, is there anything positive to report on legislative? It was pretty painful all the way through. So, we did, with WHAM, WHAM is pursuing a contract with a new executive director who was interviewed and for a very thorough process designed by our own city manager. And the position is being negotiated with someone who I think will do a very nice job and be a good public face for WHAM and really work hard to establish good working relationships with the councils around the state and hopefully with us as an example of that. So other than that, we just we really, in WHAM, we're sort of licking our wounds. Is about what it comes down to. We just didn't do very well with any of the things that were important to us. The stormwater went down. Of course, all the tax proposals went down. Now we know the lodging tax went down. And we didn't have any success with changing the 1 cent voting process to allow us to do a municipal only vote, and which is mind-boggling that you can't do that, but we've got to just keep working. We've got to keep working. We've got to build alliances with the smaller towns so they can understand that when we want to build a police station, we have very few options for doing that. And one of them would be a 6 cent, but we can't put a 6 cent before the people of Casper. We can only put a 6 cent before the entire county. So, but anything anybody wants to talk about with the legislative session now that it's wrapping up?
Charlie, I was just gonna bring up that you probably have all gotten an email from the chamber, but they're gonna have the post-legislative luncheon out at the hangar on March 13th. So we'll be able to hear from those guys how great they did for cities and towns when we go out there. But if you want to go out there, sometimes it's worth listening to.
Okay. All right, let's go around. Yeah?
Nothing really.
Okay. Any meetings to report?
I did on, sorry, I'll pull it up really quick, on Facebook, get a message from somebody about the parking ordinance. Oh, sorry, it's pulling up. So, what he said is, okay, I'm concerned with the language and direction of the proposed parking ordinance. This amendment actually decreases the enforceability and increases the nuisance to residents from the current and insufficient ordinance. Unregistered vehicles should not be on city streets and inoperative vehicles shouldn't be on city streets, but this ordinance requires the vehicles to meet both requirements before being deemed abandoned. The 100 feet from their property portion is out of line, and those vehicles should never be stored in front of any property, but only adjacent to the vehicle owner's residence. 5 days of a junker in front of another resident's property could cause serious hardship, and the reality that the vehicle is removed in a timely manner is also very unlikely. Adding to the duration of the junk will be causing a hardship to the resident. What Casper needs is to clean up the junk, not create more opportunity to diminish quality of life and economic potential. Not saying I agree with him, just thought I'd bring it up since it was sent to me.
My impression was that, and that's the abandoned vehicle, that was actually developed so that the police department has more ability to remove a vehicle, because it had been pretty onerous on whether a vehicle was disabled or not. This gives us more flexibility, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else, Kristen?
Nope, that's it, thank you.
Chris?
No, thank you.
Todd?
Not too much, just have a OYD meeting yesterday afternoon and kind of updated, Liz updated everybody on what's transpiring on the construction project. In the OYD, both the state office building and the street work we're doing. And we went around and looked for candidates for some of the OYD Oscar awards later this year. So there's been quite a few things happen.
Cool.
That's it, thank you.
Ray?
Went to the City Center meeting yesterday. I have the financial report that I'll go into detail right now, and I'll let you take about an hour. Oh, come on!
Put on the 26th.
Come on, people!
We were hoping you would.
Would you want me to go over that? I'll read every last bit. Start with the letter to the board of directors.
You got 32 minutes.
No, it was a great meeting. They're doing a really nice job over there. They did have an audit, and things came out really well over there. And so they did talk a little bit about the money that we fund to them and everything. So what they're doing and the work that they're doing is really good. So just want to give you guys an update, and they did a nice thorough report, which I will not do here on the audit, but it was good. So.
I had a pleasant trip to Cheyenne last week with Carter and the mayor and back. And I really want to emphasize to everybody I think the importance of going to the municipalities meetings. It was an excellent meeting. The educational programs, the quality that they put on were very, very good. And the informative and the informational sessions that they had there, I thought were really good too. They had two of the top guys in the state from Rocky Mountain Power there talking about their perceptions of the power, what's going on in the electricity world. And I can tell you that what you hear on particularly conservative talk radio about the future of renewables and things is totally different from what they were saying. And and they were citing, and it's just, and a lot of that you might sit there, well, what's important to us to know about that kind of thing? It's just accurate background information to have that what's going to be going on in the future and things like that. It's just well-rounded information. Plus the educational programs that they put on there, were really, really top quality. So I would really, I'm planning to be able to go to the June meeting, and I would really encourage everybody else to go because it's top quality education and great information. And it's good to sit there with people from around the state and find out that, well, we're not the only ones that are dealing with this issue or that issue, and even if all that they say is, well, don't do what we did because it really blew up on us, you know, that's always good to hear. So I'll get off that soapbox. But as June comes closer, you'll hear me talking about that.
June 12th to the 14th in Sheridan. Steve?
I have nothing.
Tom?
I'm actually meeting with a constituent on Monday. Just got a group of people together with taking a serious look at opening some kind of indoor play area for kids. So I'm gonna meet with her on Monday. I'll let you know what happens.
Yeah, WAM was worthwhile. A lot of my time was taken up with the interview process and board meetings, so I didn't get to go to as many of the workshops. I'll just mention as an aside, and I'll give more information about this later, that WAM understands that it's not easy for people to take time off from their jobs to go down to a conference for 3 days. Some people can do it, some people can't. And so one of the things that they've done, I've already mentioned this before, is they've put together a bunch of instructional videos on various topics, and they're 5 or 6 minutes in length. And it's something we might want to consider to make use of a small portion of our time to grapple with some of the things that are presented in these videos as a group. So I'll bring that up later. I did attend a CADA meeting 2 weeks ago, and CADA is very active. We have not had a presence of CADA. Bob's been going to the Joint Powers Boards meeting, but we really haven't had anyone attending CADA meetings. And so I'll be doing that from this point forward. But they have a very detailed set of goals that involve recruiting a certain number of companies during a 12-month span, working with a set number or setting a goal as far as how many entrepreneurial efforts they're going to support. They've set a goal of achieving a certain number of primary jobs, or creating a number of primary jobs with these efforts, and then growing the size of their forward Casper membership. So, I mean, they're trying to be very numbers oriented in terms of what it is they're supposed to be achieving. And for those of you who aren't aware, there are a number of subcommittees that have pulled together groups with common interests or challenges, and then looking at what are their employment needs in the future. So, for example, Charles and his group have pulled together people from around the medical community, groups that are in competition with each other and don't really sit down together, but he's brought them together to say, well, where are the deficits in your organizations where you need to have a training program to supply people with that expertise. And then that work is translated into some lobbying efforts that go down with the legislature later to try to create these programs so that there is a way to get a pipeline going that will supply those needs. And that's just an example of the kinds of things that they're doing. So, you know, it's a pretty active group. And they of course were working very hard on the 4-year education, which is a four-year degree bills that were among the many things that went down that we were in favor of. And so they were lobbying for that very, very strongly. But anyway, I'm going to stay involved with CADA's activities, and obviously there's certain things you can't disclose just because of the nature of the work that they do, but a lot of what they do I think we can talk about in here. So, and I think that's it. Do you have any final words, Mr. City Manager?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Appreciate the effort from last night, and very helpful.
Hour and a half. Who would have thought?
For what it's worth, I think we did the right thing in going out for another part. I know people are disappointed, but
To do what?
I think we did the right thing in going after another RFP.
Well, you know,
The projects were great, but
there's a lot of work involved in putting those things together, you know. And you think you're down to the last, to you and one other group, and then all of a sudden you've got other competitors. So, yeah.
I don't think we had any choice. Everybody sort of came in under those things.
If it would've been.
Seems appropriate to get a quick meeting done after last night.
Got a lot done.
That's a job.
Go to another meeting.
Okay, let's go see if the wind's still blowing. I'm betting yay.
Yeah, I don't think he was necessarily saying that, he was just talking about what.
Oh, good.
I'm so used to it because our CEO wears shorts every day, and so I don't even notice it.
Oh, is that
It's
right?
Yes.
Yeah.